All right, here's the notes from today's class, October 11th. And the first thing I want to talk about, because everybody requested that I talk while I go over the notes, the first thing I want to talk about is simplification. And I want to talk about how you simplify a fraction versus an improper fraction. First off, let's talk about a fraction. A fraction is a part of a number, a part of a whole. It's less than 1. The numerator will be less than the denominator. When someone asks you to simplify a fraction, they're asking you basically to find one number that goes equally into the numerator and the denominator. In this case, the common factor, or in this case, the greatest common factor, is 3. You take the greatest common factor, you divide that number by both the numerator and the denominator. 3 divided by 3 is 1. 9 divided by 3 is 3. And in this case, 1/3 is in its simplest form. Anytime you have 1 in the numerator, you know that your fraction is in its simplest form. So this is how you simplify a fraction, by finding a common factor. I'm going to move down over here for a moment. I just want to give you an example. Let's take 18/20. What one number goes evenly into 18 and 20? Now, just a hint. All even numbers are divisible by 2. So I know 2 goes into 18 and 20. But let's check to make sure that there isn't a factor that is greater than 2. 3 goes into 18, 3 times 6, but 3 doesn't go into 20. 4 doesn't go into 18, but it goes into 20, so that's no good. 5, no. 6 goes into 18, but not 20. So in actuality, 2 would be the greatest common factor. So I divide both the numerator by 2 and the denominator by 2, and I get 18 divided by 2 is 9, and 20 divided by 2 is 10, and 9/10 would be simplest form. Now let's go to improper fractions. An improper fraction is when the numerator is greater than the denominator. When someone asks you to simplify an improper fraction, they really mean turn it into a mixed number. How do you do that? You simply divide. The numerator goes in the house. The denominator goes outside. 2 goes into 9 4 times. 4 times 2 is 8. 9 minus 8 is 1. The remainder now comes to be the numerator. And you always keep the denominator the same. So 9 over 2 is 4.5 as a mixed number. And you can always check by simply saying 2 times 4 is 8 and 1 is 9, 9 over 2. These two numbers, a mixed number and this improper fraction, are equivalent. Their value is the same, but we consider this in its simplest form. Okay, now to today's lesson. Today's lesson was adding and subtracting fractions. A couple of things you have to know. You must, when you add and subtract fractions, have a common denominator. In math, common means the same. You find that common denominator by using multiples. The least common multiple and the least common denominator are the same thing. So, when you find the least common denominator, you have to list the multiples of each denominator. So I want to just differentiate factors and multiples so we don't get this confused. Factors are used to simplify fractions. That's what we just did. Multiples are used to find the least common denominator. You need to understand the difference. So let's look at example number 1. 8/15 plus 1/6. I cannot add these two fractions because they do not have the same denominator. So what I have to do is take my 15 and 6 and list the multiples. Once I have found the first multiple that has come up between the two of them, the least common multiple, that is the number that now is going to be my new denominator. So now, I put my fraction bar, and the 30 is my denominator. And I come back to my 8/15ths, and I look at my denominator and say, what did I do to the 15 to make it 30? I had to multiply the 15 by 2. So because I multiplied the denominator by 2, I must multiply the numerator by 2. And that's how I get my 16. Right now I'm creating an equivalent fraction by doing whatever I do to the denominator, I must do the same to the numerator. I do the exact same thing for the other fraction. I take my 6 and say, what did I multiply my 6 by to get 30? I multiplied it by 5. Therefore, to keep things equivalent, I must multiply the numerator by 5. 1 times 5 is 5. And that's how I get my 16 plus 5. At that point, you only add the numerators. 16 plus 5 is 21. You always keep the denominators the same. So I'll get 21 over 30, and then I'll proceed to simplify. 3 goes into 21 7 times, and 3 goes into 30 10 times. So my answer is 7/10. So the steps are the following. First, you must find the least common denominator. Step 2, you must multiply to create an equivalent fraction. In other words, whatever you do to the denominator, you must do the exact same thing to the numerator. Step 3, add or subtract. It depends if you're adding or subtracting the numerators. Step 4 would be to simplify. Let's look at subtraction. Here is my original problem. 5/12 minus 3/20. I do the exact same thing. I cannot subtract these because I do not have a common denominator. I list my multiples. The least common multiple is 60. I write my fraction bar, 60 in the denominator, and I go through the process. How did my 12 become 60? I multiplied it by 5. If I multiplied this by 5, the denominator, I must multiply the numerator by 5. That's how I get 25. Same thing for this one. 20 times what gave me 60 times 3. Since I multiplied this denominator by 3, I must multiply that denominator by 3, and that's how I get 9. Now I'm subtracting. So now I only subtract the numerators. 25 minus 9 is 16. My denominator stays the same, 16 over 60, and I must simplify. Now in this case, one of my students said, well, I know 2 goes into 16 and 60, which is correct, because both are even. So I have 16 divided by 2, excuse me, and 60 divided by 2, which gives me 8/30. But notice, I'm not finished. Both the numerator and denominator are still divisible by one number, which would be 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 30 divided by 2 is 15. So at that point, I'm finished. The answer is 4/15. So that is the answer for this particular equation. Okay, and then we have some other examples where you have a mixed number. You must turn your mixed number into an improper fraction, and then you proceed just like we did before. 13 over 10, because we have 10 times 1 plus 3 is 13. 13 over 10 plus 1/4. I found the least common denominator between 10 and 4 is 20. And I multiplied 10 by 2, so therefore 13 by 2 is 26. I multiplied 4 by 5, so 1 by 5 is 5. 26 plus 5 is 31. Keep the 20 on the denominator. At this point, my answer is an improper fraction. I must divide. 20 goes into 31 one time. 11 becomes the remainder. That becomes my numerator, 11/20. Let's check. 20 times 1 is 20, plus 11 is 31 over 20. And subtraction will end up to be the exact same thing. Just turn this particular mixed number into an improper fraction. And if they give you a whole number, for example, let's say you have 4 minus 3/8. You would just say 4 over 1 minus 3/8. The least common denominator will be 8. And you'll say 1 times 8 is 8. So 4 times 8 is 32. And then you'll put your subtraction sign. 8 times 1 is 8. 3 times 1 is 3. And then you'll just say 32 minus 3 is 29. You'll keep the denominator the same. Improper fraction. Numerator, the numerator always goes in the house. 8 goes into 29. How many times? 3 times. That's 24. And I have 5, so it's 3 and 5/8. So whether you have a mixed number or you have a whole number, you must always turn it into an improper fraction, which is a rational number. So remember that. You only can add, subtract, multiply, and divide by turning your mixed numbers into rational numbers, or at least that's the easiest way for us to do it. Okay, so that's what we learned today. Let's look at a homework example. I want to talk about page 82, by the way. I want to talk about first of all, the word of here before we go on. Anytime you anytime you are multiplying a part of a number times a whole number, you will use the word of. In these cases, the word of means multiply. So I want you to keep that in mind as you do your homework and proceed to do multiplication like we learned the other day. Let's see if there's one of these I'd like to do with you. How about this one? Number 15. So 3 3/8 plus 5/12. 3 3/8 plus 5/12. First thing I must do, turn this into an improper fraction. 8 times 3 is 24, and 3 is 27 over 8. Plus 5 over 12. Next thing, step 2, find a least common denominator. 12, 24, 8, 16, 24. Least common denominator is 24. What do I do to the 8 to get it to be 24? I multiply it by 3. So I must multiply 27 times 3, which would be 81. I know you want me to check, I'll check. Take my word for it. 81 plus 12 times what gave me the 24? 2. So 5 times 2 is 10. At this point, I add my numerators, 91/24, and then I divide. 91 goes in the house, 24 outside the house, 24 goes into 91. Well, let's round this to 25 and say 25, 50, 75, 100. That's going to be too much. So let's call it 3 times. And 3 times 24 is 72. 11 minus 2 is 9. And 8 minus 7 is 1. So I will put an answer of 3 and 19/24. I'm going to make sure this is simplified. 19 is a prime number. It only has 2 factors, 1 and itself. So I know that this particular fraction is simplified. So the answer to number 15 will be 3 and 19/24. All right, any multiplication questions, look at the notes from yesterday that are on YouTube, and hopefully this will have been helpful, and I'll see you, not tomorrow. I'll see you Wednesday. That's it.